You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health Podcast. I have Dr. Katharina Lederle. She's a founder and director of sleep services at a place called Somnia, SOMNIA, in the UK. She's a sleep expert and published author, 10 plus years of research experience. She has a PhD in human sleep and circadian physiology, a master's in biological sciences. So, Katharina, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, tell me what drew you to the world of sleep?
So what drew me to the world of sleep? I think lots of different things. So I remember when I was really little, first time then sort of thinking about sleep. So I grew up on a farm, really in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, no neighbors, apart from an army base a few miles down. And they fly helicopter. And now, any pilot has to train, and they have to train in the daytime, but also at nighttime. And for me, hearing the sound of helicopters in the middle of the night has always been like a lullaby. So if I was to wake up, and hear the helicopter going above me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm safe, I'm fine, roll over and fall asleep again. And, and be happy, hunky-dory the next morning. My dad, however, for him, it's an entirely different story. And he is someone who's naturally very chirpy, very funny person, great dad. But after a night of helicopter flying, his sleep would have been, shot into pieces, so to speak. And he'd be so grumpy the next day. And in fact, he actually was grumpy already in the evening because he kind of knew what was coming. And back then, like I said, as a little girl, I was wondering, how different the experience for both of us is around sleep. Like for me, it's great, and for him it isn't, and how it affects our mood. And then, though, it took me quite some time to actually get into the sleep field. I first did a little bit around chronobiology with wild horses, and sort of the timing system there. And relatively later on, after my master's, sort of decided, okay, I'm going to change slightly, and look into sleep in humans, and have been in the field ever since.
Interesting. So what's to know about circadian rhythms besides, the basics that, everyone's on this 24-hour cycle because of the earth, and we have different chronotypes, night owls and larks. I mean, I've spoken to several sleep people about this, but going deeper, what's the important stuff that you've learned about it?
So the important thing here is that it is not exactly 24 hours for most people, but again, not all. It's a little bit longer, and it's somewhat different for each one of us, and it can also change as we grow up. And you mentioned chronotypes, so that the concept sort of whether you go to bed early, you're an lark, or go to bed late if you're an owl, and then everyone is in between. It follows a nice bell-shaped curve. The importance to actually find out for each one of us what is my chronotype, and related to that, what are my sleep times? What is my personal sleep window? And then sleeping and being awake according to that window set by the body clock. But the importance, like I said, is to figure it out for yourself what that is and not to sort of just go with what the media is telling you.
Yeah, the society tells you, it rewards you for being an early bird, and it punishes you for being a night owl. It tries to make you feel like you're a bad person and you're going to fall behind, and what's wrong with you, and
Exactly.
you're lazy and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just convention that we start working at 8 or 9 o'clock, and it's the same for school. Sometimes it's even before 8, and that suits some people, but not everyone. And we're sort of ignoring something here, and actually, in a way, sacrificing their health because someone who's an owl who wants to go to bed late and may still need 8 hours, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, they constantly have to cut their sleep short during the working week in order to make it into the office by 8, 9 o'clock. Um, and it would be much better if we had flexi times and created working times around someone's body clock. Certainly, owls, they would perform much better and actually be more productive if they sort of could come into work as and when they are ready. And then obviously, they could stay longer and still do an 8-hour day. That's not the question.
Has there been science to physiologically look at the differences between, larks and owls? Are there any underlying physical differences?
Yeah, so there are a number of studies, for example, testing larks and owls at the same clock time, for example, starting at 8 o'clock a.m. and then doing it in regular intervals on different performance measurements physically as well as cognitively. And you can see that the lark, is bright and chirpy and very productive in the morning, but the owl isn't. They become more productive, properly wake up, and can properly cognitively function in that sense later in the afternoon. So there are differences between them, and we also have differences in genes. Although that's sort of a very young research field when it comes to chronobiology and chronotyping, but there seems to be differences in the genetic markup as well.
Well, what are the cues that cause people's clocks to be one way or another? I know light is a major cue, but if light is a cue, it seems to cue differently in larks versus owls. And you have melatonin cycling, you have cortisol cycling. I mean, again, you're saying it's just too new that no one has really done the blood work or looked at the underlying physiology to see what's happening.
So it is there is a lot sort of lot of research groups currently looking at this, what exactly is difference and how are these difference in genes affecting the molecular workings of the clock, but that's too early. But just talking about coming back to the light, what you mentioned, light is the major zeitgeber or time giver for our body clock, and that's the same as in an lark as well as in an owl. But how sensitive we are at different times of days, that seems to be somewhat different. There's a difference between all of us, but then broadly speaking, between these two groups. But again, we shouldn't forget there's also that big group in the middle, the hummingbirds, or they don't really have a name. Right, one shouldn't forget. Larks and owls are really just actually the extreme ends, and they could be something like 11 or 12 hours apart. So coming back to the light is what resets our clock on a daily basis, and especially morning light is very important and very powerful there. If we don't have the light, and you could think of a blind person who's completely blind, so there's no light perception whatsoever, in these people, their biological clock runs according to its own rhythm. And as I said earlier on, in most people, it's a little bit longer than 24 hours, which creates a real problem for these people because for some time of the year, they're completely out of sync with the rest of the society. Then they will overlap, and then they drift off again, so to speak, meaning that for some time of the year they are ready to go to work when we go to work, normally sighted people, but then it may be that actually during our nighttime they are ready to go to work, and you can quickly see that creates problems for them, to fully participate in our society.
So blind people tend to drift into a different sleep-wake cycle over time.
And non-entrained, they will follow what their clock is saying, and it's because it is a little bit longer than 24 hours, which is the natural light dark cycle and the one we are entrained to, they will drift and lag behind us. And at some point, it just happens sort of that they will overlap again with our night dark cycle, but not for long. And then they will drift behind, lag behind again, because they don't get that synchronizing light signal that we all need each day.
I mean, they still have eyes. The eyes are open to the sun, so it's. Does that mean the act of seeing, that's the processing of the light, or is there something else in the eye that's actually acting as a receptor for the light?
Yeah, very good question.
Maybe their optic nerve doesn't work. Weird.
So very, very good question, and I didn't explain that before. So the clock gets the light information via the eyes, but they're special photoreceptors. So the rods and cones, they do input to some degrees, but there's a new relatively new photopigment called melanopsin, and that detects light levels in that sense. You can't see with it, so there's no visual that comes from it. It simply detects light levels, and that's really what feeds back to the clock, telling it is light outside, which means it's day, and then the clock will broadcast to the rest of the body it is daytime. And when sort of the light goes and darkness comes, the clock will then know, okay, it's nighttime now, and it will broadcast nighttime to the rest of the body. And you mentioned melatonin early on. That is actually the way, or the signal the clock uses to tell the rest of the body it is nighttime now. Do everything that's appropriate for nighttime.
So how sensitive do you believe our perception of light is? If I'm in a room that's pretty dark, but not pitch black, meaning let's say I sleep during the day, it seems like even though the room is dark, it's not pitch dark, my body can still tell that it's during the day. My sleep is very different than, truly at night where it's pitch dark.
Yeah. So again, we can't look at sort of one day or one night in isolation. There's preceding days and nights. We are designed to sleep at night and to be awake during the day. Yeah, that's how we have evolved also a visual system, because we can't see very well at night. So we could easily fall prey to the big predators. So it's about getting into safety, sort of going, into the cave or up the trees, wherever we sort of first evolved and lived. But there is a difference in light sensitivity across the 24-hour clock, and we're most light sensitive at night. And their little light is enough to affect us physiologically, and can lead to a suppression of melatonin.
Okay. So what's the I've been grilling you about chronotypes here. What's the main area of your work? What kind of do you do a lot of clinical work, or what do you see and who do you help?
So my main area is to raise awareness for sleep, and related to that also for the body clock, and because it governs so many other things as well. But predominantly it's raising awareness for sleep, helping the public understand what sleep is and why it is so important. But it doesn't stop there. It's then also helping people to improve their sleep. And again, that could be, the wider public, but I also work specifically with people who suffer from insomnia, using a non-drug approach, helping them to get their sleep back on track. And ultimately, I think really what drives me here is helping people live their lives to their full, because we all need sleep, to recharge and recover and to be the best we can be the next day. So it's really about improving quality of life for people.
Okay, so you work with insomnia a lot. What kind? Is it onset insomnia? Is it middle of the night, later in the morning? What kind of different kinds do you work with?
Any, and insomnia, as you rightly point out, it's an umbrella term with different symptoms, and they can change within the same individual from night to night, or across months. But for me, it doesn't matter what it is. It's about educating the person of what's going on, and how behaviors, but also responses to not sleeping, can fuel the insomnia, the wakefulness, or slowly sort of help for sleep to come back in.
Well, what's an example of a common insomnia and then one that's more tricky or more rare? What are some examples?
Yeah, so probably most common is the onset insomnia, where people go to bed, and a lot of my clients will say, "Oh, I'm sitting on the sofa and I'm almost nodding off, ready for sleep, and then go upstairs, brush my teeth, get into bed, head heels to pillow, and bang, the alarm bells go off, and suddenly the mind is racing again, and the heart's beating super fast, and then it might tense up, and then sleep." Is sort of just gone. That's very common. Also common is to wake up in the middle of the night, sort of 2, 3, or 4 o'clock. That seems to be sort of the time. And then again, it's similar, that mind is just so busy and going round and round in circles, and sometimes about big problems, but sometimes just about little things, what should I wear tomorrow type of thing. But in the middle of the night, it's like the biggest question. So they are very common. Less common is the insomnia that's due to unrefreshing sleep, where the person doesn't really report a sleep problem. So they're not aware of having difficulties to get to sleep or waking up. They just don't feel refreshed the next day. That's the rarer one, I would say.
So what kind of therapies do you do for people that have onset insomnia? Is it like the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or are there other tricks?
Other tricks. So what I'm using is called acceptance commitment therapy, or ACT, which was developed in the 1980s in the US, actually, around, I think, in the University of Nevada. And that is sort of coming from CBT. It's a behavioral change therapy, but it is very different in its approach and how it works. And in the way the name gives it away, it's acceptance commitment therapy. So there's an element of acceptance in there, and also an element of mindfulness, which takes up a large part of what I teach my clients. This sort of acknowledging of what's going on, and then mindfully responding to the situation, rather than sort of that automatic reaction that gets us into a struggle and the fight with being awake, and actually increases anxiety levels of anger and frustration. And when we are angry or anxious or frustrated, we're not calm and relaxed, which is sort of the state much more conducive to sleep. And this is something I help my clients sort of get back into by developing a more mindful way of living. And then there are also, of course, sort of lifestyle behaviors that we look at, like caffeine intake and alcohol intake. And I'm not saying one can't drink any coffee or can't drink any alcohol. I enjoy a glass of wine every now and then, and a cup of coffee sometimes. But it's just sort of when and how much, and using it strategically rather than just consuming it sort of automatically.
So what's some advice for the first moments when someone lays down? Is that when there are things they can work on to help them sleep, or a lot of it's way before? Again, the caffeine and the alcohol for the day, the mental preparation, the wind down. Where do you find that people find the most value?
So what I teach my clients is that preparing for sleep starts the moment you wake up in the morning. Yeah, that's when it starts, because day follows night, night follows day, wake follows sleep, sleep follows wake. It's all connected. Yeah. So it's the moment we wake up, and so it starts with, for example, in the morning, getting the sunlight, going outdoors. And if it's just 10 minutes, it's just 10 minutes. If you can be half an hour, great. But getting some time, spending some time outdoors, then throughout the day, again, it's about seeking some light. If you can get a desk by the window, great. Again, if you can go out for lunch, fantastic. Then looking also at sort of exercise levels, making sure that you don't just sit all day, but there's some sort of exercise, and even if it's sort of just standing up, working at a standing desk, if you can incorporate a gym or run, that's fantastic. Caffeine, like I said, it's absolutely fine to consume, a couple of cups of coffee, depending how sensitive you are, of course, but then cutting it out by sort of the mid-afternoon. And for alcohol, little is better, and also the earlier you consume it is better. And I wouldn't say, drink every day. I would say, sort of pick your moments, because alcohol can affect sleep, and it doesn't need to be much that we drink in order for it to have an impact on our sleep quality. And then there's also food. And everyone talks about healthy diet, and that's certainly important, but there's also more and more research showing that it is when we eat that is impacting on our health and our well-being, and therefore also on our sleep. And there's some exciting research by Professor Sachin Panda, I hope I said the name correctly, from the States, who's also published a book. And he's showing that it's better to sort of restrict your eating window to something like maybe 10 hours. If you can do 8, I think is even better. But something like 12 or 10 hours, and have your last meal earlier on in the evening, or late afternoon, rather than later in the evening.
What happens? I mean, when it is too close to bed to eat a meal, and I would think small goes down a lot better than large, so you don't have reflux and throw up in your sleep or kind of digest in your sleep. But what's there any specific recommendations you have there?
So how much time to leave between your dinner and going to bed? Hello?
Sorry, I lost you for a sec. Yeah, time. Sorry, we'll fix that. Yeah, how much time before you sleep should you leave and stop eating, and size of the meal, anything to eat or not eat, those two things.
Okay, right.
What are some recommendations?
Yeah. So I would say leave, something like 3 hours. But again, there will be more research where we can sort of refine the recommendations here. But yeah, I would sort of go for the sort of leave 3 hours, and then a lighter meal is certainly better, because the body and the stomach, they are slowly shutting down towards the end of the day, because from an evolutionary perspective, we wouldn't sort of have things to eat after the sun set. There were no refrigerators, nothing like that when humans first evolved. So everything is shutting down there. So eating your main meal earlier in the day, maybe around lunchtime, is potentially better than having that main meal late in the evening. So I would go for lighter things. Certainly, that you're not hungry. Don't want you to starve, because if you're hungry in the middle of the night, that can then again disturb your sleep. So do make sure that you get the sense of fullness. But it's about choosing things that might be that not so heavy, and also it might be helpful to eat sort of something with slow releasing carbohydrates, where you slowly and have this slow, steady energy supply across the evening and into the night.
What happens if you get hungry before bed? Let's say it's been almost 3 hours and you're ready to go to bed, and you think, "Oh no, I forgot. Now I'm hungry." What could you do?
Yeah.
What's the strategy?
So what I've heard Dr. Sachin talk about is that when you first start to sort of restrict and shorten your eating window, that can be sort of a bit of adjustment period, and sort of that hunger pang that can come. I think what one can eat then is maybe something like a cracker, or something like maybe with protein, or a bit of sort of muesli, that type of stuff, that sort of, well, like I said, it sort of gives you some energy, but it's then sort of slow release.
What are some of the I guess the main complaints people have that come to see you? Is it just that they have insomnia, or is it that their sleep is disturbed in some other way? I mean, if you were to silo the different things that people complain to you about, what are some of the major ones?
Mm-hmm. So predominantly it's insomnia, really. That's sort of the service that I provide, and there I can see people who've had insomnia maybe 4 months or 3 months, and I also see people who've had insomnia for 30 years. So there's a huge sort of span, but predominantly it's people who have had insomnia for longer than a year, who come and see me, and their life is sometimes severely impacted upon by their lack of sleep, and how they go about their day. And then I sometimes also see people with delayed sleep phase syndrome. So that is, we were talking about larks and owls. So these are extreme owls who want to go to bed really, really late at night, more like sort of 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And then, sort of still want to sleep, like I said, they're 8 hours. And that is obviously, a severe clash with how society works. And so sometimes, I see people with that as well, sometimes teenagers with delayed sleep phase syndrome.
Well, do you run into people with delayed sleep phase syndrome that sleep 8 hours and they're fine? They're somehow able to do it?
If they're able to do it, if they maybe run their own business where they can structure their day, very often they're fine, but a majority of people can't. They have to conform to society, and that's when then we see problems in health, but also in mood, which is predominantly down to a lack of sleep.
Are there any new techniques or new studies that you're waiting to see the results of that you think will be breakthroughs for sleep?
I think the ones around the eating window that will be helpful because it helps keeping our internal clock better aligned with sort of everything else that happens in our world. We're learning more and more that the gut, the microbiome, is immensely important for our health and well-being, but also for our mood, and that there is probably some sort of relationship between the microbiome also impacting on the clock, on circadian rhythms, and vice versa. So anything around that, I think, will be very helpful. Also then with a look at sort of chronic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, but also cancer, to support people there, as well as actually in mood disorders, depression, for example, kind of helping people or providing people with better treatments.
Okay, interesting. Do you deal much with sleep apnea, snoring, that kind of thing, or is that when you observe that, you pass them on to a different practitioner?
Yeah, exactly. Then I would pass them on because I don't have a sort of a clinic in that sense for sleep apnea. You need monitoring to sort of diagnose that. And so if there is someone where it could be sleep apnea, or sleep apnea could be part of the insomnia, then I will pass them back on, or sort of refer them back to the GP to then go to a sleep clinic where they can do an overnight study, can be properly assessed, and then get the right treatment. Often that's sort of CPAP, that's the oxygen mask, or sort of a mouth guard for some of them. But I will then pass them back on sort of to the GP.
All right. Well, very good. So what's the best way people can get in touch and ask more questions, and if they're local to you, come see you for help?
The best way to get in touch is just send me an email via the website, or my email address is on the website, and then I will respond, as soon as. But that's the best way to find me.
Okay, well, very good. Well, Katharina, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure. Always happy to talk about sleep and circadian rhythms.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.